Thank you so much. Thank you, Mirzat. And did I pronounce it correctly? I forgot to ask you earlier. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It's a pleasure, and I'm really like flattered that I was invited to speak to you. It will be a pleasure. And so I don't have a PowerPoint presentation because I'm more interested in maybe like a back and forth with you, like ask you some questions probably during the duration of the talk, if that's comfortable with you, or it can be, well, it depends, or it can be like 20, 30 minutes, and then we're going to have a Q&A session because I'm really interested in you and your students' experiences with sports video games. So prior to, yeah, no problem. Yes, yes. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. So, okay. Thank you. And so before we started our conversation, because before we got like on air, actually Mirzat asked me what made me interested in the topic, and I said that it's actually hard to uh, hard to explain something that you've been doing your whole life. So I've been playing sports video games my whole life, and for me, the appeal always was in its links to reality, like the authentic leagues, teams, competitions, players that I could control and or participate in. I was especially interested in righting the wrongs. Like my team wasn't performing particularly well. Just a bit of like personal story. I'm a fan of a team called the Queen's Park Rangers. I don't know if you are familiar with it. They used to be in the English Premier League, and they were really bad. And I wanted to sort of right the wrong and make the team good. So that was one of my reasons why I like to play sports video games. So I would like to start with a brief history of, okay, that's awesome. So I would like to start with a brief history of video games, because the history of video games actually began with a sports video game. The name of the game was Tennis for Two, and it was created by a physicist named William A. Higginbotham and technician Robert Dvorak in the year 1958 at Brookhaven National Library. And the game was designed with the purpose of showcasing the equipment to the visitors of their laboratory while keeping them entertained. The game was created on what is an oscilloscope, so it's a laboratory instrument graphing electrical signals, displaying them as waveforms. And basically, it was just a game of tennis with like waves still seen on the screen. Interestingly, the game was also the first instance of what we may call sports washing. So, because it was used by Higginbotham, the man who participated in the creation of the atomic bomb in the 1930s, to warm the image of his laboratory, his studies, and his staff. So, basically, with the game, he was telling his visitors, yeah, we contributed to deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, but we've also made this cool video game, so please like us. Now, graphically and entertainment wise, the game was nothing special in comparison to, say, the newest iteration of tennis sports video games, Topspin 2K25. And from present day perspective, it's hard to understand its appeal, but we don't want to get into like presentism. So ever since the beginning, video games have been connected with physical activity, or at least the idea of physical activity. Video gaming is based basically on the same principles and the same mechanics as physical activity, which should explain the connectivity aspect of sports and video games. Now, sports video gaming is indeed the extension of sports spectatorship in a way, as the gamer not only roots for their team, but also influences the outcome. So, and the importance of physical activity, understood obviously as physical activity of some pixels running around on the screen, or just numbers if you're like me interested in championship manager or other manager games. But it's never put into question. Like, the importance of physical activity is a given. And physical activity habits are the base of the mechanics of a sports video game. So you have running, jumping, squatting, pushing, pulling, etc., all the stuff that happens in other video games as well. All the while the gamer remains stationary, which is reminiscent of spectatorship during a sporting event or watching television in general. So sports video games are largely unrepresented and underappreciated in academic circles, and for some reason not worthy of the same approach as other games. Interestingly, my book, which Merzat alluded to earlier, is the first single author book, academic book, on sports video games, because there were edited collection, but this is actually the first book on sports video games, which begs the question why. And it's one of the wrongs that I wanted to write. So an extension of what I understood as the appeal of sports video games. And the lack of monographies devoted to sports video games is peculiar, especially since they cover such a broad spectrum of types and titles, yet for some reason are grouped together as sports video games, even though they are very different. There is a difference, say, between games like Mario Kart or Rocket League and Madden NFL, EA Sports FC, or NBA 2K. And now I am primarily a sports scholar, so I am more interested in the latter types of games, so Madden, EA Sports titles in general, and 2K games. And I don't want to put down the former. It is just that from a sports scholar's perspective, the interplay between real sports and their on-screen interpretations is much more interesting. In addition, that approach allows me to do something unprecedented on a full book scale, which is to combine video game scholarship and sports scholarship, which was the aim of the book in question as well. Now, the most fascinating aspect, again, from my perspective, is of sports video games is what takes place outside the video game, which is equally as important as what takes place on the screen. Another sports scholar, Martin Luther, writes that there are at least two kinds of controlling: in-game, on-screen bodies in digital games. You control games symbolically and iconically. And the distinction refers to the relationship between the motion performed on the controlling device and the one reacting to it in the game. In sports video games, the mechanics are the same as in other genres, the sensory requirements likewise, but the thought process behind them is much more nuanced. Now, so if I'm playing, say, I don't know, FIFA, right? And my team is on the attack, I have to decide who to control, meaning to whom pass the ball to, as I can have a great shooter and a great dribbler to choose from. And knowing the names and the abilities of real life players on my team, I do not need prior experiences with the video game itself, as I know what to expect from my players. I know the controls, but let's say I have Ronaldo on my roster, I'm obviously going to pass the ball to him because he's Cristiano Ronaldo after all. And this is impossible in any other genre of video games, as when I control a group of soldiers, superheroes, or any fantastical creatures like the orcs in Warcraft. I need to have some prior experiences with them in order to know their strong sides and learn how to utilize them. So, in other words, what makes sports video games special for me is their intertextuality. Consider, for example, the links between one of the most famous video game characters and the Jumpman logo. Now, we probably know what the Jumpman logo is, the iconic Michael Jordan image of him dunking a basketball that you can see on the Air Jordan brand. Now, historically, Mario was originally called Jumpman, and the word Jumpman now carries different connotations, bringing to mind one of the most successful athletes in the history of professional sports, so Michael Jordan. And Mario's appearance is unassuming and unathletic, which is part of his appeal, right? As a, say, regular character. And Jordan's appearance was anything but unassuming and unathletic. It was like Michelangelo sculptured the perfect human being, at least in like the physical sense. And you had this guy called Michael Jordan who looked like that. And the Jumpman logo is now an integral element of the Air Jordan brand. So the most popular athlete in the world was equally a carrier of capitalist values as Super Mario was. And one of the goals of my book was to prove how efficient of a device putting athletes like Jordan into the shoes of Mario was, with the basketball player making the jump to a different platform. So, pun intended, I guess, benefiting a certain cultural and economic current associated with capitalism. And an opposite approach does not advance any issues, as it exists only as meta commentary for those in the know. And Ian Bogost, one of the most famous video game scholars, he observed when discussing a game from the Mario universe that Super Mario Strikers is a kind of soccer, just as indoor soccer is a kind of soccer. So I could be discussing those things as well, but I'm more interested in the interplay between real sports and video game representations of said sports. So the term sports video games is open for interpretation, and maybe this is a good moment to ask you, meaning the listeners, what do you think sports video games are? How would you define sports video games? Okay. So, what is your idea of? Yeah, please, Mirzat. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. No, I'm asking you because this is very like there are no set borders. So I'm asking, what's your proposition? Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. And we have somebody also interested. Soha, am I pronouncing that correctly? I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly.
Hi, can you hear my voice?
Yes. Hi.
So I have been playing. Actually, I have learned how to play badminton for like 2 years, and so when I have started to play in the Nintendo Switch sports game, there are so many different basically sports that you could play. There were like basketball, like tennis, so many other things. There was a section that was basically badminton that for the first time that I've played it, I was really good at it, which I didn't even play games that were similar to it, like Just
Hmm.
Dance, things like that. I didn't even play those games. Do you think that knowing basically how to do that kind of sport uh, would it help the basically the video game, like in playing the video game, even though you had no experience before?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you. And that's what actually I was alluding to because uh, basically it helped you, right? From your experience, playing badminton actually helped you playing those games. So this is the same. So obviously, I have to agree with you because from your perspective, it was very helpful. And when you're playing like Nintendo Wii games, you know how to play them. You need some basic instructions when you're playing bowling or tennis, right? But otherwise, uh, you know that, right? So just from your experience with the real sport, and it's similar to playing with real players as well. So it's the same. And so thank you for that question. And uh, also somebody said any video game in which a collaborative action occurs, which is also a very, very good definition, right? Although you have some collaboration involved in adventure games as well. There are some games in which you actually have a split screen and you have to collaborate with somebody, but there's still some athletic, quote unquote, or sporting ability, sporting activity involved. And Sagar said, I believe most of their influence is cultural since they are introduced to a new audience. That's also true, that they sort of the fact that sports video games actually refer to something that is real get people interested in the real thing. Like Merzat mentioned wrestling games, and I'm gonna get to wrestling games in a while because wrestling is not considered a quote unquote real sport, even though myself I'm a wrestling fan of the WWE, but but still they are considered sports games, and I'm gonna get to the why in a moment. So thank you for those definitions and the questions. And so my proposal of a sports video game, or my proposal for distinction, might actually be criticized because it's kind of exclusive, but at least it doesn't leave space for interpretation and doubt, just as sports depicted by the games are locked inside of the confines of their disciplines and or organizations. So while some sports are present as mini games in other sports video games, a good example of that is in GTA games you can play basketball, in Yakuza games you can participate in some sporting activities, but they are not sports video games per se, right? So sports video games should, according to my definition, again it's only me, they have an almost singular focus on depicting their main disciplines as closely as possible, or rather as closely as the leagues or organizations allowed them to, meaning the leagues that they are depicting, especially when the league or the organization matters, meaning when it's significant, right? So modern sports, in general, were not left untouched by the changes that take place in the structure and organization of late capitalist societies, and the most important of which was the increased reliance on consumerism brought about by the involvement of big business in the world of sports in general. So, in fact, sports video games may be responsible for shaping the present day world of sports as we know it, right? So the criterion for differentiating between a sports video game and games of other genres is in a way similar to establishing what is a sports movie. So I know this is kind of a flawed logic, but there's a piece, a fragment of truth here as well. So the sports film scholar Lester D. Friedman writes that a sports movie focuses on athletic contests, those who compete in them, and those whose lives revolve around them. And usually, he continues, sports films brandish an ethos of manly virility by showcasing clashes between violent men who prove their manhood and achieve victory by being stronger and tougher than their opponents. Now, the difference here is that sports video games do not rely on plots, but on depictions. Sports are not new or unexplored when it comes to ideological influence. Sports were always about ideology, and even though people like to claim that sports aren't about politics, well, they are. And just an example that I don't know if any of you are familiar with, but World Cup 98, the soccer or football game between Iran and USA was sort of a very important contest culturally. Like the game left a mark, kind of, right? Even though the game itself wasn't memorable. So the other distinction that needs to be made is between a player and the gamer, but this is fairly understandable. So just to avoid confusion in my book, and I'm generally a fan of that distinction, is that you have a gamer is somebody who plays the game, and you have a player, meaning an athlete who is depicted in the video game. So to avoid confusion with, say, soccer players, football players. And in general, another factor that's for me is very important in sports video games is their seriality, because they are released annually, updated every season. And I want to ask you, why do you think that is? Why, as opposed to other video games, sports video games need to be involved in that cycle of just being released year after year, even though they aren't, from a layman's perspective, much different from one another? Yeah, please. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Any Thank you so much. Thank you, Mirzat. Any other question? Any other answers to that question? Why are games released manually? So financial gain is the obvious reason, right? Yeah, and Soha asked this questions in the comments, right? Why we have these games released annually? So the thing that changes and it changes even more in recent years, is obviously the rosters change, right? And the teams change their jerseys almost annually. And when you're a devoted sports fan, you want to, like, why do, for example, people buy jerseys of, say, Real Madrid, even though they look basically the same? Like, only small details are changed when it comes to the jerseys, right? The color scheme is always the same. Or let's say Inter Milan and AC Milan, they always have the stripes. AC Milan has black and red, Inter Milan has black and blue, but these jerseys are always kind of different year after year. Even though the sponsor may be the same, the company that makes those jerseys is the same, yet there are small details that are changed. Like, for example, closer to the color, you have some gold added, and that's it. And yet, people buy those jerseys, and similarly, people also want to have the rosters updated. And obviously, let's say again with Cristiano Ronaldo, right? In one season, he is, let's say, his speed, his attributes may be at 95, but in a different season, he was a bit slower. So to simulate the experience, his attributes have been slightly changed, tweaked, and therefore the experience of playing the video game is just different. And Sagar wrote in the comments, I don't know if those comments will be present on YouTube, so I'm going to read them out loud if that's cool. So the changes may be in line with the rules that are being updated. Football rules, for example, also they consider the importance of statistics and team management. So that's basically, yeah, that's very on point as well. So that only explains the cycle. So from a fan's perspective, it's all about just having the best sort of quasi simulation of the real product at your disposal. But as Merzat pointed out, from the producer's perspective, it's all about financial gain, because they just don't contribute anything new to those games. The soundtrack is different as well, but the studio has to pay for the soundtrack, so that doesn't change much from the studio's perspective as well. So yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense, to be honest. So returning to my book, the way I divide it, so the first analytical chapter of my book, because I devote some parts to history, but the first analytical chapter is how real sports influence video games. And in it, I show how sports video games try to simulate reality, which sort of slides into this annual cycle of production and recycling the same product over and over again. The chapter covers the rules of sports video games, real player likeness, branding, and ratings. And I'm interested in how real life athlete avatars, as well as commercials in sports video games, are produced and how they look like. So what I mean by that is that when you play a sports video game, let's say you play FIFA, again, let's stay with the most basic example, you have the stands and you have the logos of the sponsors that you regularly see during a sporting event. And obviously, to emulate this experience, FIFA has them too. It has the sponsor logos and the companies that sponsor events. The interesting thing is that those aren't necessarily the same sponsors that you can watch in your country, and the sponsors in your country when you're watching, say, a Champions League game differ from the sponsors that I can watch in my country. Like, I'm talking about the commercials and the replays and the way the studio is arranged. This is very different. But the stands, they stay the same internationally, and companies pay for that privilege to be advertised in the sports video games, which is a source for revenue for the video game companies, because making a video game is super expensive as well. So I'm also interested in this chapter how sports video games try to imitate television broadcasts. Now, I don't know if you have that in Iran. Do you have replays? Just the replay itself, is the replay sponsored by a company or not really? When you have a sporting event and there's an action replay during a game, is it this replay is brought to you by such and such company? Mm-hmm. Ah, okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thank you. So not really, but we can watch it via sporting channels. Okay. So in video games, it's, for example, the NBA has the Sprite dunk of the game, something like that. At least it was the case when Sprite was the sponsor of the slam dunk contest. And when you're playing NBA 2K, Sprite is also the sponsor of the dunk of the game. And obviously, when you're playing NBA 2K, sometimes it is a basic dunk, but because it's a dunk, Sprite must be involved because they're paying for that to the company, right? And also the interesting thing is that when we're talking about the simulation, so this is still how video games try to emulate real sports, is that sports fans don't necessarily aren't necessarily as responsive to simulation. And the thing I'm interested in here is so you guys know FIFA or EA Sports, right? But EA Sports FC, but there was this wonderful series called Pro Evolution Soccer. It's been discontinued. It's now eFootball, and it's no longer that good. So Pro Evolution Soccer, technically made by Konami, was actually a better simulation of a soccer slash football video game. But because of the fact that FIFA had more leagues and FIFA was more accessible, it was more arcade like, actually FIFA won what was called the Soccer Wars. And also, so this is one instance. Oh, okay. Somebody wrote PS3 was my first experience of that franchise. Yeah, the teams were unlicensed, but the gameplay itself was awesome, right? Thank you, Parham, for that. Yeah. So in the next chapter of my book, I write about how video games influence real sports. So I don't know if you follow the Premier League, but it was sponsored by EA Sports, and it played a prominent role in the league's official fantasy football platform. So there's this thing called fantasy football where you pick players and those players then score points for your team, right? It's like no money is involved, so it isn't gambling, but it has some elements of gambling involved. And when you played the EA Sports, not EA Sports, when you played Fantasy Premier League, you had animations made in FIFA by EA Sports presenting the players. So instead of actual game footage, you had footage that was made in FIFA, right? So that's how deep the sponsorship was. And for example, NBA related media used the NBA 2K simulation mode to predict outcomes of games or series, or simply provide entertainment. Like there was when NBA, because this is the last, I think this is the last season where NBA is on TNT, if I'm familiar with their deal. So Shaquille O'Neal and Candice Parker, you had a men's basketball player and a women's basketball player. and they were sort of arguing during one of the shows whether who was better or who was more dominant. So uh, via NBA 2K, they played a game. They, meaning the TNT, the broadcaster, simulated a basketball game via a video game between 5 Shaquille O'Neals and 5 Candace Parkers, and the Parkers team won, and they obviously had a laugh about it in the studio. And just coming back to Cristiano Ronaldo, it's interesting that video games also influence the way athletes think of their discipline. So, Cristiano Ronaldo was once asked by the website FIFA.com about his dream goal, and a couple of years ago. And he said that his dream goal would be to go past 11 players and score. And people started obviously ridiculing that, because Cristiano Ronaldo is famous for his sort of well, when he was playing at Real Madrid, let's say that there were moments when he actually got angry when other players scored instead of him. So he was kind of this egotistical player. And obviously, you need to have an ego to be at the level that Cristiano Ronaldo is. And Marca, the Spanish main sports site, published a news piece about this story. And it commented, here I quote, "The goal Cristiano dreams about only exists in FIFA." So you can see that athletes no longer measure themselves against other athletes, but also against their virtual avatars. And talking about video games, you obviously need to also, the most important influence of sports video games on real life athletes has to do with the NCAA. Now, I hope you're familiar just a bit with the college game in the United States. So originally, college athletes couldn't profit from their likeness being used in video games. But video games about college teams were very popular, and this changed when a group of players, so you had a group of athletes, there were football players, and since I'm primarily interested in basketball, I remember a basketball player called Ed O'Bannon. He played for UCLA, and they sued EA Sports over the use of their likeness because they weren't compensated for that usage. And this lawsuit led to the creation of what is called the NIL, so name, image, and likeness. And thanks to basically video games using the likeness of athletes now, thanks to that lawsuit and obviously the American judicial system, college players are now able to sign marketing deals and earn money, which actually prevents or should at least prevent college players from leaving school too early, because America had a problem with athletes it was called one and done. So an athlete went to college for 1 year and then left to play in the NBA. Whereas now it sort of encourages athletes to stay in school and basically study, right? So and the next chapter in my book, Career Modes in Sports Video Games, and in it I analyze the evolution of career modes in sports video games and how from simply featuring game after game played by the gamer, they try to tell stories which usually limit the gamer's experience. And I would like to ask you, did you ever play career modes in sports video games? And why do you think they exist? What's the point of having like a career mode when you create your likeness, like yourself, in a sports video game? What's the point of that? And why does that need a separate mode? Okay. Okay, so if you haven't, no problem. Okay, Merzat, you want to say something? Sorry. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, and Parham also said in the comments that personalizing the experience in an authentic manner, creating the feeling of playing as in real life. Yeah, that's true. But the thing with career modes that was sort of criticized is that uh, even though they become by the fact that they become more complex, so it's no longer just you creating your player, you're playing a game, you're playing the next game. uh, we as human beings always look for structure, right? Or some, we need to have meaning. So career modes eventually expanded, and for example, NBA 2K16, the career mode was directed by Spike Lee, one of the greatest movie directors of the end of the 20th century. And the gamer controlled character is given a nickname and a backstory, which was great. There were, however, some issues. So I'm a guy from Poland, and I want to create my player, and I want him to share my experiences. So I want myself to be in a basketball game, but I couldn't in this particular version of NBA 2K because um, there was only one family, and our character had a sister. He had the parents, and he had also a friend, and the whole story centered around the player and his friend causing some issues for the player. So it was more about the relationship between the two. And the worst thing was that the performance during moments of actual gameplay was in vain, because it didn't progress the story in any way. There was just one story that it followed, and it didn't matter how good your player was. You still had to like align and follow the linear story, which proved very limiting. And I'm sort of, so this chapter itself is about the limitations of career modes, and the second part of the chapter concerns the grind, so a process necessary for gamers to improve their players. So it nowadays it involves, well, mostly spending real life money on virtual currency because it's much quicker and the effects are more instantaneous. Whereas if you want to improve your player by playing game after game after game, the progress will be much slower and you will eventually become frustrated with the experience. And chapter number 5, so my second to last chapter, and the issue that I'm obviously talking about those chapters because those are the issues that interest me the most in sports video games. So the title of the chapter is Race and National Identity in Sports Video Games, and the goal of that chapter was to show how sports video games deal with issues of race and nationality, usually taking place in multinational and multicultural environments. Sports can bridge the gap between people of different identities, and sports video games can also aid the process because of their interactivity. So, let's say, for example, I want to play. I'm interested in the Iranian national team, right? And I want to play as the Iranian national football team. And the video game provides me a chance to do that. But the question that or the issue that I'm most interested in this chapter is how closely does the fact that I'm playing the Iranian national team emulate how the Iranian team actually plays? If you know what I mean, because that wasn't particularly good English, I think. But still, if let's say I want to play like Argentina. I want to play Argentina, so I want the virtual Argentina to play as Argentina. If I want to play as FC Barcelona, I want to play the style of play that Barcelona plays. Clearly, I'm interested in experiencing that vicariously through my players, and I'm sort of retracing the process. Because in the earlier sports video games, say FIFA 98, you had all the national teams, which was great, but at the same time, there were certain players that were placed in different teams. For example, there was this Polish player called Jerzy Dudek. He played for Liverpool later. His famous goalkeeping parade in Istanbul, like, made football history, I guess. So he was actually a member of the Hungarian national team for a reason. Like, so there were some things that were some details. Well, it's not a detail. He's playing for a different country, but some things were just misplaced. But still, their heart was in the right place. They wanted to make the game as global as possible, and also, video games interestingly take place in a sort of post-racial, idealized reality, inclusive and non-discriminatory, which isn't the case. As you follow sport, when you follow sports, you know how fans can sometimes behave towards players of in how can you, like, I'm sorry, I just started reading the comment and got derailed. So obviously you can see, yeah. So thank you. So there's no abuse in sports video games. Like, when you hear the sound of the stands, there are always some nice chants, right? There's some booing when you pass the ball to the goalkeeper, but okay, you get it. But that's the only boos that occur. And when there's a foul, you hear the boos, but you don't hear them when there's some abuse towards, like, minorities, or let's say any racial slurs. You don't have that, which sort of simplifies that experience and creates this ideal picture of sports that we want to have. And the last chapter of my book, Gender and Sexuality in Sports Video Games, and in it I focus primarily on the underrepresentation of women athletes and the sexualization of women in sports video games. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with games such as BMX XXX. The title speaks for itself, which was released in 2002, and you had basically naked women riding on BMXs. Or Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball. It was released in 2003, where you had women in bikinis playing volleyball. Other than that, there was little or no female representation in sports video games, but it changed with FIFA in 2015, UFC in 2016, and NBA 2K in 2019, when you had in the case of FIFA, you had women's teams, just national teams, and last year I think they added the Women's Champions League for the first time. In UFC, you had the women's division, which is kind of understandable because UFC didn't allow women to fight in cages as well. Other federations did, but the president of the company, Dana White, remained sort of like not interested in that. But then Ronda Rousey came and it sort of changed his appeal. And in NBA 2K, you have the WNBA. And their position in sports video games is far from equal to that enjoyed by their male counterparts, but their presence is finally felt, which is great. And the chapter itself is devoted into two sections. One is about masculinity and femininity, and in it I tried to show how sports video games, while still being a male-centric form of entertainment, create spaces for female participation on and off the screen. And this is what I'm most interested in this particular chapter. And on this chapter, I finish my book. And so I went a bit longer than I wanted. Sorry for that, but still we sort of managed to get some questions in, and now I'm open to your questions. So thank you, and please, whatever you want to ask me. Okay, thank you. And thank you. It was a pleasure. There's one question. Yeah. So you want to read it or? So that's a very hard question, because what does it mean to begin video game studies? There are a couple of so you mean like get what books should you read, or what approach do you want to take? Because it depends on the approaches that you want to take. In my uh, is there a major at university? Well, it depends on the university again. Like some universities open majors and some don't. At my university, I'm actually like my uh, institute is the Institute of Literature and New Media. And thanks to that, we have some leeway in the new media. Actually, video games are new media, so you can always get into that. Plus, you can combine a literary approach with studying video games, so you can study them as literature, even though it's not the popular approach, especially not now, considering the scope of video game studies, uh, it being a separate branch. But you can start by seeing them as literature and then just go from there, using tools to analyze literature to analyze video games, because it's always storytelling, right? So you can start with stories and then just go from there. Okay. I'm actually primarily a sports scholar, so thank you for that question. But I I'm more interested in studying sports. I'm actually sort of getting around to studying professional wrestling more. So I'm more interested in that, because I'm more into stories than the stories that aren't as evident. So in sports, you have the stories which are sort of concealed, and you need to dig deeper. So I'm into that. But thank you. Yeah. And another question: do you want to read or should I? Okay. So here, well, you can always write to people who deal with sports studies, and they will probably help you. So, Soha, if you want to research sports studies, Merzat has my email. You can get my email from him, and obviously, if you have any questions about beginning to research sports studies, I'm really open in helping you and providing you with whatever you want and need. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, this is a very so the thing about video games that makes them harder to analyze as opposed to say a movie or a book is that you're involved in the video game, right? You're controlling your player. Uh, so when you're controlling your player, it's hard to take notes. So my advice would be uh, play the game, then watch the gameplay if it's available on YouTube, take notes, and then play the game again with the notes in your head so that you will see if you notice the same things as when just watching the experience. And then you can have a better understanding of how the game works, how its mechanics works, and what are you supposed to feel and understand, right? So how the game sort of controls you. And if I may, just I want to return to the question about how you begin studying video games. So there are, let's say, apart from the literary studies, you can also study the mechanics of video games. So how the video game influences your decisions. This is also interesting, right? When you're playing like a sports video game, you can't do certain things. You can't go out of bounds and just run into the stands and do something. You need to sort of abide to certain rules, and it's interesting to study also how the video games makes you do certain things. Right. Yeah. Mhm. This is I hope I understand the question correctly. Does it concern the gameplay of the game, meaning what buttons are you supposed to push, or how do you control the players, or does it involve certain limitations involved in the video game? Because obviously the disciplines are different, but there are also different soccer games, different basketball games, etc. And the mechanics are different. The best way of experiencing those mechanics is just playing video games, right? In like the animations are different. For example, if you're playing NBA Live games as opposed to NBA 2K games, in NBA Live games, the players are okay, mostly limitations. So the players move differently. So, for example, when you press the dunk button in the NBA Live game, the players are sort of the player models are lighter and they move kind of differently. The dunk is performed differently. There's a different animation. Whereas in NBA 2K, the players are more solid, if I may call it that, like more the gravity works differently, and you sort of have to take that into consideration. So even though it's the same discipline, the limitations are different as well, imposed upon the gamer himself, herself, themselves. Yeah, I hope I answered that correctly. Yeah. Yes. Again, if you want to contact me like via email, I can provide you with some helpful links if you're into that thing. So open to that. Hmm. If you want me to send it to you, okay. Okay, awesome. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. That's a very that's a very good question. Yeah, and I was thinking about body art when I was actually submitting my proposal to Routledge. Like body art was one of the names that I mentioned. Also Guy Debord for the Society of Spectacle as well, which is like they're sort of intertwined. They're awesome texts. Yeah. So the thing that I've noticed is that just from my surroundings, that people who are introduced to the virtual version of the sport first are sort of quicker to get discouraged by the real thing. I don't know if you have seen the same thing. Like in my generation, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 came out. It's I don't know if you have played it. It's like a skateboarding game, and you can do everything. Yeah, yeah, you played that as well. Yeah, and you can do everything in that game, right? But then you enter a skateboard, and there's this basic trick called Ollie, which is just you jumping with the skateboard up, and it's really hard to master. And in the video game, you get no points for that trick. It's not even a trick; it's just a basis for other tricks. And a lot of people got discouraged. A lot of people of my generation got into skateboarding after that game, but they got discouraged because they couldn't even do the basic trick. So instead, they just preferred to play it on the computer. So it's interesting that you said that it's a copy of the copy, but the interaction sort of it works more on people, as you've said, who are first introduced to the sport because they understand the complications of the sport and how much time does it take to master the sport, as opposed to say somebody who is introduced to the NBA by playing NBA 2K and your player is dunking the ball, shooting the free, and then you enter the court and you can't even like reach the basket with your 3 point shot because it's so far away. How is that possible, right? So it's interesting how these things sort of interact and influence one another, and they influence our expectations. And it also maybe ties into the argument that we have constantly of social media when it creates this idealized picture of reality. And when we're confronted with the real thing, we are discouraged. And even though it's supposed to make us feel better about ourselves, it makes us feel worse because we are unable to keep up with what we're seeing on the screen. Like that's yeah, that's how I see it. Yeah, like short term, you get this rush of dopamine when you win a game, of FIFA, say, but then you like on long term, you want to play a football game with your buddies, and you're really bad at playing football, and you get tired and whatever, and you don't take those factors into consideration. So instead, you just return to your safe haven and say, put on FIFA, play on amateur against, I don't know, the computer, or play against, I don't know, a 10-year-old on your console, and you win 10-0, and you're like, oh, okay, this is what I want to do, instead of play actual football and master the art of scoring goals. Yeah. You think so? Okay. Yeah, I still don't think so, because then what would FIFA be based on, right? What would they base the video game on? So, mhm. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's very good. Like it. Oh, so this ties into the discussion that we have on AI currently, and how AI can actually impact the way we see reality. Kind of, so you can have maybe an AI created sort of player who becomes so interesting that people actually tend to treat him as real, even though he's only present virtually. Okay, okay. There's actually in FIFA, I think 2 or 3 years ago, on Queens Park Rangers. So that's what. Well, that's not the reason why I know it, but I know it because it was Queens Park Rangers. There was a player who was killed as a teenager, and I think 10 years after his death, they decided to put him into the FIFA video game as an actual player, and you could actually play as him. So he was present, even though he's no longer with us. He exists in the realm of the video game. So this is really interesting, how that works. Yeah, yeah. Sure. You can you can ask. I have a my evening is cleared, so I cleared my evening. We can talk. Next, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. counterpart. Yeah. Mhm. Okay, that's a really interesting question. Like, when we're talking about, yeah, but well, not a question, but an issue. When we're talking about esports, so this basically ties into discussion whether we want to consider esports a real discipline or not, right? Like, is playing video games similarly to watching television? Is it an activity or is it not an activity? It sort of dates back to sort of this thing, at least from the way I understand it. But I don't know how you understand this issue. And Mhm. Okay, okay. The control aspect, right? The activity itself. Yeah. When you're talking about, yeah, yeah. Please go on. No, no, no. Finish your. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, that's a very interesting issue. And similarly, when you think about, let's say, chess, for example, is chess sports or not? Is bridge sports or not? Right. So this ties into that discussion that we're having. Like, I don't know how it's case with the PE in at your university, but at my university, students, for example, may pick chess and it's considered as a sporting activity. So you can, yeah, but video games are not considered. We don't have a video games course like esports course, which should be available. And also, when you're thinking about esports teams, these guys work out a lot, meaning they train, but they also like have a certain sort of regiment similar to athletes. They need to have a certain level of nutrition. They have coaches. So it's sports just as anything else, right? Okay, that's my observation. But that's, yeah. And Pals also said something interesting. I don't know if you, yeah. I can, yeah. So I think Soha said, yeah, AI can make us lazy the same way as video games give us fake dopamine. That's a very good observation. So, is the can the dopamine be considered fake? I know what you mean, but if Soha could expand on the fact that dopamine is fake, what does it mean? Because you experience it, it's actually produced, but if you could explain what fake means. And in the meantime, I'm going to read a comment by Parsa. So I think we extract constant pleasure from playing video games because of the free creativity and capacity given to us, which is not as restricted as it is in real life, which is true, right? We have some physical limitations that don't allow us to overcome, that we can't overcome. And for example, I'm 5'9" and I will never dunk a basketball, right? I can take the basketball, like lower the basket as I did in my backyard, and I can dunk the ball. But uh, maybe this can be also considered like fake dopamine because I'm pretending that I'm taller and I can dunk the basketball. So similarly, in a video game, when I'm dunking the basketball, this can be my player is dunking basketball. It can also be considered a source of fake dopamine, right? Okay, so
Hello, can you hear my voice?
yeah,
Okay. So I actually see the fake dopamine in video games the same as you would scroll on TikTok or on Instagram, because you are not doing anything productively. So it looks like a fake dopamine rather than a productive way of using dopamine, producing dopamine.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think that way.
Yeah. I totally understand it. And obviously this is a very good observation. If I may just have a question. So if how does that differ from the dopamine I get when I'm watching a sport and my team scores a goal and I'm celebrating, but I'm not the player, right? I'm not on the field. I just watch the game and I'm celebrating with the players, even though I'm not a part of the players. Is that real dopamine or fake, according to you? Like, I'm not doubting you. I'm just interested in what you think about that.
I think anything that doesn't involve like you doing it, for example, you can watch basically people playing, music in like opera, and you're watching it. But if you are playing that instrument, it is not basically a dopamine. The same goes for like sports. If you are not doing it, I think it is basically fake. You are just watching it. It is good to watch sports, but because you are not the person that is being present in that basically event, I don't think it's basically a real dopamine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. I was just interested in what you think. I don't have an answer to that. It's just very subjective, so I'm not gonna like, you know. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's very subjective, right? So I was just interested in you know, yeah, because it's an interesting concept. Yeah, a small argument, right, about the size of chest. Yeah, meaning esports, right? So yeah. I'm actually, if I may be honest, I'm not interested in esports scholarly, academically, but there are a lot of esports leagues, right? There are teams who play League of Legends, which has nothing to do with sports, the game itself, and it's the probably the most popular esport currently, right? So strategy games are more into like are more esports than actually sports games. It doesn't have to be a sports game. You don't have to play a sports game to be considered an esport athlete, which is kind of interesting as well, right? It isn't limited to just that. Okay. And Parham also said something interesting. I don't know if this was mentioned earlier, but the introduction of Kinect in Xbox platform in the early 2010s drastically blurred the line between fake and real dopamine. Many sports games needed physical interaction via the Kinect sensor from the player. Yeah, that's true. So you once again, for example, tennis is an expensive sport, right? But you can play tennis via Kinect, and you can feel as if you're playing tennis. But the thing is, again, if you want to get into that this distinction, that's not real tennis, right? And that doesn't mean that you will be good at tennis. Then you will even though you may be like the world champion in Kinect Xbox, you will enter the court and be like crushed by a mediocre athlete and will probably not score once. So yeah, it's true. Yeah, champion, and it's a different sport, right? And as Parham said, you're sweating a lot. So we're not doubting that it's a physical activity, right? Which it is great for physical activity. There, I think UFC released an official video game for Kinect where you could actually train as a UFC fighter or train like a UFC fighter. That was how it was sold or marketed. But the thing is, it wasn't real UFC training. And if you trained and then you stepped into the octagon, you wouldn't have a large chance of succeeding, right? So it's just, but it's still an activity, and it's always better to do something than sit idly, right? So yeah, I totally agree with that. Thank you. And thank you. It was a pleasure. Uh, oh, thank you. Somebody said my hair is absolutely gorgeous. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you. I really enjoyed talking to you. And once again, if you want to contact me and have some questions or want to like some info about what to read and how to study video games, obviously you can contact me and we can have a conversation via email. So if I don't write back in say 2 or 3 days, uh, then probably I didn't get your email or something happened. So I usually try to answer people quicker, sooner rather than later. So thank you, and thank you Mirzad for the invitation. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, and bye. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, and bye.